Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, when opening a newspaper, magazine, or scrolling down news feeds on our phones, tablets, and laptops, it seems that AI has almost become the pantomime villain. You know, robots with red eyes taking our jobs, ruining our world, taking over the world. But what these stories seldom tell you is that it's people that program the AI. We ultimately determine where this tech goes. So today, I want to dispel a few myths around AI. So I've invited Dr. Shwartz from AI Perspectives onto the show to lay a few misconceptions to rest once and for all. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Connecticut so we can speak with Dr. Shwartz from AI Perspectives, who's going to talk about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Neil, and thanks for having me on the show. I started my career in artificial intelligence way back in 1979 when I moved to Connecticut in the U.S. to do postdoctoral research at Yale University with Roger Schank, who was one of the pioneers of AI. Then came several AI startups, one of which made a public offering, and another became one of the leading business intelligence products of the 1990s. And since then, I've invested in or co-founded several other AI-based companies, as well as some non-AI-based companies. More recently, I wrote my book, and I'm currently advising companies, investing, writing, and speaking on AI.
And you have such a great career here and so much expertise and experience in the industry. And one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today was to try and bust a few myths and misconceptions around AI and finally set the record straight. So let's start with the obvious one on today's episode. And that is, will intelligent robots take most of or all of our jobs?
No. And let me tell you why. One fear about AI that might even trump fears about killer robots is the fear that AI will take all our jobs. If robots with human-level AI were created, they'd be able to read manuals, take classes, and learn to do almost every job. Worse, they could read thousands of books in the time it takes a person to read one. And if this happened, nearly every job would be at risk. But fortunately, AI systems can't and won't do this because we don't know how to build AI systems that really understand language. Although the fear of robots with human-level intelligence is groundless, and we don't have to worry about intelligent robots threatening every job, some jobs are vulnerable to advances in AI. Jobs that involve monitoring camera feeds can be replaced with AI-based facial recognition and object recognition systems such as gun recognition. And down the road, self-driving taxis might take jobs from taxi drivers. But it's important to recognize this is already happening with non-AI software from companies like Uber. And in fact, AI software will take far fewer jobs than conventional non-AI software. Conventional non-AI software is developed by programmers who write exact instructions that the computer executes. Non-AI software has been taking jobs in e-commerce, word processing, many other areas for decades without causing widespread unemployment. I don't want to minimize the human impact of job loss. You know, the loss of a job can be a devastating life experience. And as a society, we need to find a way to retrain people who've lost jobs to technology, but AI will not be anywhere near as disruptive to jobs as conventional computer software has been or will be.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And technology just create so many more jobs as well. And I think that's one of the things you hit right there when you said about retraining. It's about bringing everyone along for the ride and ensuring that people come along during these tech changes. And I think also other skills such as management, strategy, creatives, innovation, and all those kind of skills can't be replicated by AI. So what type of jobs are not vulnerable to AI, do you think?
So to understand what jobs are and aren't vulnerable, let me briefly explain how AI and the most important type of AI, machine learning, works. Machine learning is the type of AI that's responsible for most of the current excitement around AI. Suppose you want to build a program to help diagnose a particular disease. You'd create a table of data in which each row represents one person. Half the rows in the table represent people who have the disease, and half don't. Then the row for each person contains features from their medical record that are important, like age, whether the person smokes, and so on. And then the table of data is fed into a machine learning algorithm that learns a function that can predict whether a person has the disease based on their medical record. Now, let's talk about functions. A function is just a formula. You probably remember learning formulas like the one that's used to convert centigrade temperatures into Fahrenheit. You multiply the centigrade temperature by 9/5 and then add 32 degrees. But is there any intelligence in that temperature conversion function? Absolutely not. It's just a function. And there's no more intelligence in the function that recognizes faces or the function that translates languages than there is in the function that computes Fahrenheit temperatures. So the question becomes whether a function can take over a job. And there are only a very small number of jobs that can be replaced by a single function, and maybe a few more that can be replaced by a group of functions. So, for example, some jobs can be replaced by a computer vision function augmented with some conventional non-AI programming. Examples would be spotting terrorists in airports, maybe reading MRIs, although AI hasn't done so great there, and things like sorting parts in a factory. And speech recognition functions can replace customer service jobs that involve strictly following a script. But on the other hand, no one knows how to build common sense or real language understanding into computers. So any job that requires common sense reasoning or real understanding of language is safe. That means, as you said, jobs requiring people-oriented skills in finance, marketing, sales, and human resources are probably safe from AI for our lifetimes, and maybe forever. But they are not necessarily safe from non-AI technology automation like traditional computer software.
And before the lockdowns began and the global pandemic engulfed the world, I did go to Arizona and did a little bit of work there around the tech scene. And of course, they had so many driverless cars everywhere. One of the things I noticed that the tech seemed to be working fine, but it was people that were not too happy. And there were even reports of people running these driverless cars off the road. But I'm curious, when do you think self-driving vehicles will dominate our roads and highways? How far off is it, do you think?
So computers in general, and the ones in self-driving cars, are incredibly fast. They won't fall asleep, and they won't drive drunk. So people reason self-driving cars will be safer than human drivers. But the reality is that's a faulty assumption. Computers can't do one critical function that keeps human drivers safe. They can't think and reason. Well, most of us have encountered unexpected phenomena while driving. A flood makes the road difficult or impossible to navigate. A section of new asphalt has no lines. Drivers are fishtailing, trying to get up an icy hill. an elderly driver falls asleep and his car heads right at you. That actually happened to me. We all have our stories. But we don't learn to handle those unexpected situations in driving school. Instead, we use our common sense. And we use our common sense to anticipate. If we hear an ice cream truck in a neighborhood, we know to look out for children running towards the truck. The problem with self-driving vehicles is no one knows how to build common sense into computers. So what happens when a self-driving vehicle encounters a situation it hasn't been programmed for? It either crashes or it proceeds so cautiously it causes a traffic jam. Computers can be handled to program any one specific situation, but they can't be programmed to handle all of them. Everybody has at least one crazy story about driving. There are 1.4 billion drivers in the world. So there are probably 1.4 billion different crazy stories. So this means for self-driving cars to dominate our roads, manufacturers would have to individually program those 1.4 billion different edge cases, identify them, and then program them. And that's going to be almost impossible. So without common sense, self-driving vehicles are going to be limited in deployment. Can they go point to point at 5 miles an hour in a corporate park? Sure, there aren't very many of those unexpected edge cases that they're going to encounter. Deliver packages at slow speeds? Probably. Offer taxi service at slow speeds in limited parts of cities? Probably. They're already testing that in Arizona, as you mentioned, Neil. But they may end up blocking traffic and clogging sideways because they'll stop whenever they're not sure what to do. Will they drive me from my home to anywhere I want to go? Not in the next 10 years and maybe never.
And another huge topic is around privacy, discrimination, and safety issues around artificial intelligence. Is there anything that stands out for you?
Probably the biggest issue is facial recognition. That's getting a lot of press these days. On the positive side, facial recognition systems are used to catch terrorists, criminals, and even child traffickers. But the National Institute of Science and Technology here in the U.S. published a 2019 report evaluating 189 face recognition systems from, I think, 99 different developers and found that most of the systems were between 10 and 100 times more likely to match a Black or Asian face to a criminal than a white face. So this is discriminatory, and it's led to innocent people being dragged from their homes and put in jail. And the issue isn't specific to facial recognition. You have the exact same issue with AI systems that make decisions on loan applications, hiring decisions, and criminal sentencing decisions. Let me explain why this happens, because it's not a result of biased programmers. Most facial recognition databases are composed primarily of white males. And as a result, facial recognition training produces systems that do well on white males, but don't perform as well on people of color. So you would think this would mean these systems would catch fewer minority terrorists and criminals, and that's true. But it also means the system will falsely accuse more innocent minority citizens. So the first thing to remember, as I just mentioned, AI system creators aren't biased themselves for the most part. The second thing to remember is that the learning algorithms aren't biased. What's biased is the data that's fed to the learning systems. So how do you fix facial recognition? You retrain the facial recognition systems on diverse sets of data. And unfortunately, that's harder than it sounds. You do the same thing with loan decision systems, hiring systems, and other decision-making systems that are trained with data that's free from bias. Facial recognition systems are also a major threat to personal privacy. In China, the government is connecting security cameras across China to centralized facial recognition technology in an effort to monitor all their billion-something people and identify and monitor dissidents and criminals. It's even been used to catch toilet paper thieves. This is unlikely to happen in the US because we're so privacy conscious, and probably not in the UK, but the technology is available.
And I'm curious, what do you think about artificial intelligence in cybersecurity? Do you think we're going to have battles between good AI and bad AI? How do you see that panning out?
Yeah, I think we will to some extent.
Yeah.
But the idea of an intelligent virus that can think its way around the network is quite scary, but it's complete fiction. That can't happen. What's really happening in cybersecurity is that hackers are using AI to find vulnerabilities and build better viruses, and better ways of inserting them into computer systems. But the defenders are using AI to detect those viruses. And in fact, the AI that's detecting those viruses can be built in a fairly generic way that actually, I think, gives the defenders a bit of an advantage, at least with respect to AI, because the hackers always have the advantage because they're taking the offense. So AI contributes to the cat and mouse game, but on balance, I think AI helps the defenders more than the hackers.
And I think any business leader that's listening to our conversation today, they've had 101 sales calls from the next big software solution or service, and it's got artificial intelligence tagged on. And we both know that there's many of those solutions don't even have any AI in there. So for investors, though, how should investors evaluate AI companies?
So the first thing you need to do is to understand the difference between conventional software, that software we discussed where programmers write explicit instructions, and AI software, which has a learning component. And you have to recognize that a large percentage of any AI application is going to be conventional software. Second, you need to understand whether you're looking at a platform or an application, an AI platform or an AI application. On the AI platform side, the market for machine learning development is very saturated, but there are new markets like machine learning operations and data operations that are exploding, and you're seeing some very interesting AI companies in those spaces. But usually, most companies that are evaluating AI, and for the most, even investors that evaluate AI, most of what they're going to be seeing are applications. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to let the entrepreneur wow you with buzzwords or the number of AI PhDs on the staff. You ignore those, and instead you evaluate the company in a way that you would without AI technology. You look at the market, the sales, the team, the financials. You evaluate the product market fit without considering the AI. And then you ask the entrepreneur how they see the value of the AI technology. Does it enable functionality that wasn't previously available? A good example is computer vision applications. Without computer vision, you can't have any application in which the computer interprets images. And does it enable better, faster, cheaper functionality than the competition? So you ask about the competitive barriers, and then, if it all makes sense, you evaluate the entrepreneur's claims as part of the product due diligence. And there's a few other things that I'd like to mention. So one is that data is the key to machine learning applications. It's not the algorithms that you use. Proprietary data is a strong competitive barrier. And aggregating data from public sources can also provide a competitive lead. But the algorithms used to learn from the data are relatively unimportant. 99% of application developers should be using off-the-shelf open source algorithms. So to do that, data science experience is critical for AI applications. PhDs are rarely necessary, and sometimes not even useful. Finally, you need to avoid bias, and your AI applications need to be interpretable. So if you build a loan application, you need to be able to explain to somebody why their loan was denied. And finally, AI applications degrade over time from both a performance perspective and from a bias perspective. So they have to be monitored and retrained. So all of those are factors that you use to evaluate a company, whether you're a corporation or an investor.
And I think over the years, the tech industry has built a reputation on moving fast and breaking things, or asking for forgiveness rather than permission. And we've all seen the effects of some aspects of the tech industry, of the problems that have been created that way, because we've not been thinking about what happens in the long term. So as a result, I think tech has moved much, much quicker than legislation and regulation. But do you think it's time for governments to regulate AI?
In some ways, yes. And in some ways, no. So in yesterday's New York Times, there was an article that mentioned that by 2050, we're likely to have truly intelligent robots, and we should start worrying about it now. And that's just wrong. All we know how to build are these functions that don't have any intelligence. And if intelligent robots were really possible, we'd need to regulate AI as a whole. We'd need built-in protections so that robots don't become conscious and take over. But that isn't going to happen. So we need to stop worrying about it and focus on things that can happen as a result of AI, and in particular, as a result of these functions that we can build with AI technology. So AI needs to be seen as many different capabilities that need to be regulated or not regulated individually. Discrimination is a big problem in AI systems. Discrimination needs to be regulated. Same for privacy. Fake news needs to be regulated. AI-based weapons of war would ideally be regulated, but it's doubtful that will happen. But I'll tell you, the thing that scares me most is the self-driving vehicles that we talked about before. Many manufacturers are testing driverless vehicles and other types of autonomous vehicles on our roads. And most of those tests are occurring with a safety operator behind the wheel who's responsible for taking over the steering, braking, and acceleration whenever they detect an unsafe situation. But we're also starting to see the testing of cars without any drivers. And the problem is that the governments are rushing this technology to market. In the US, many states are allowing these cars on the road with no testing or proof of safety. The legislators are essentially assuming that because computers make fast decisions and don't get tired, they'll be safer. But they're not taking into account the fact that the computers can't think and reason. So in my view, legislators should develop safety standards for these autonomous vehicles before allowing them on our roads without safety drivers or remote operators. There's even been proposed legislation, I think there was some in the UK, to remove liability from manufacturers in order to get these vehicles out on the road faster and supposedly improve safety, though I think it's going to do the opposite. And to me, that would be a disaster. Manufacturers need to be held responsible for their autonomous vehicles, or they won't have an incentive to wait until they're safe.
And if we dare to look into the future, I'm going to ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball and say, do you think AI will take over the world, or do you just have any predictions for the future of the impacts that AI will have on our world?
So, Neil, I don't believe we'll ever see truly intelligent computers. So we don't need to worry about intelligent robots trying to exterminate us or take all our jobs. I do believe that AI will take far fewer jobs than conventional software. That software where programmers write the explicit instructions for the computers to follow. And I think we will see limited self-driving. We're already seeing self-driving shuttles on corporate campuses where you're just going from point A to point B. We'll see delivery service vehicles where you're delivering pizza in small, slow moving vehicles, and we'll probably see self-driving taxis in limited areas where you can basically ensure that there aren't going to be many of these unexpected situations that pop up. But I don't think we'll see self-driving consumer vehicles unless the governments get involved and require vehicles to be able to communicate with one another and with infrastructure like traffic lights and construction zones. Over the next couple of years, I think we'll see a big focus on regulating AI that makes decisions, loan decisions, medical diagnosis, prison sentencing. We'll also see a big focus on making systems that are more explainable, that are auditable, and that are bias-free. I also think we'll see a big stratification in the way AI is used in authoritarian countries versus democratic countries. So we talked earlier about how China is moving increasingly towards a 1984-style Big Brother society. China is also linking all the surveillance cameras to keep track of dissidents. In contrast, the U.S. is passing laws against the use of facial recognition in law enforcement.
I've loved chatting with you today, and we've covered so much in a short amount of time. But a question I always like to ask my guests too is if there is a particular song that has inspired them in their tech career or helped them get their head in the zone before they go on stage or to deliver a keynote or a panel. Is there a particular song that stands out for you throughout your career?
There is one. Carole King's Beautiful came out at the start of my career. The first line of the song says, "You have to get up every morning with a smile on your face." I think it's so important to wake up in the morning and look forward to at least a part of your day. Not only that, but one of the first things you do in the morning is look at yourself in the mirror. It's hard to see a smile on your face in that mirror unless you treat people right. And as Carole King said, if you do that, people will make you smile.
Wow, what a great choice to have there. And I think it was on the Tapestry album, is that right?
Absolutely.
Oh, man, great choice. Well, before I let you go, for anyone listening that would like to find out more details online about your work that you do or contact you or your team, what's the best starting point for that?
So best place is go to my website. That's www.aiperspectives.com, where you can find information about my book. You'll also find a free ebook that has much more technical information about AI and my blog.
Well, one of the things I've loved most about chatting with you today is busting a few myths about AI and fear around technology. And we've all seen those articles. You mentioned the New York Times one. If we scroll down our news feeds, we've all seen them. It's the robots from the Terminator movies with the red eyes. And they don't really offer any value into the discussion at all, just spread fear. And I've loved how we've calmly sat here and discussed all the issues, the good side, the bad side, and everything in between. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share that with me today.
I enjoyed it, Neil. Thanks for having me.
At last, we've finally been able to lay to rest a few myths around AI taking over the world and intelligent robots taking our jobs and self-driving vehicles ruling the roads, not to mention tales of AI and cybersecurity and AI-based weapons of war. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you agreed with anything, if you disagreed with anything, I'd love to hear your views and get more information on the story from different vantage points. So I encourage each and every one of you to share your story too. So keep those emails coming in to me here at techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep those messages coming in. Hopefully I'll get to speak with you on a future episode. If not, I will join you again tomorrow and I'll be my voice into your earballs once again in a non-sinister way. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.